I'm joined by Marie, who from the Career Service, and Owain from the Faculty of Business at the Open University. And you'll see as well that we've got some widgets there we'd like you to fill in. So we'd like to know what sorts of roles are you interested in the future. These word clouds, by the way, where you've got the three options. If you have just joined us, you need three things in there. So if you can't think of three things, just put a full stop or a cross so that your answers then send. We've also got some multi-choice questions. So here you just open the widget and then select on the one that applies to you. When considering graduate recruits, what's the most important factor? And outside of the legal sector and investment, which of these companies has the highest graduate salary? So there are some widgets there. Have a go and we'll feed those into the conversation as we're going through, and of course any questions that are coming through. Now, business is an interesting one, isn't it? Because as I said before, we've got a lot of younger students studying with the OU, but business also does attract a lot of people who may already be in professions wanting to upscale, add to their careers portfolio, etc. Just so that we can tackle Beatrice's question then, Marie, any ideas about sort of either end of the spectrum where age might be an issue in terms of getting placements? Things that you might advise for students, because unfortunately it can sometimes be a factor.
Yes, I mean, I would say in terms of placements, I suppose the challenge is that most organisations who are offering placements, so typically you say a year-long placement or a placement over a summer, etc., are working on the basis that students are studying full-time. So often some of those placements might not sort of match very easily or marry very easily with sort of the working lives of many OU students who are studying part-time. So I think that's sort of one of the challenges, that an employer would expect somebody who's looking to do, say, a year's placement with them not to be at the end of their degree, but to be part of the way through. Because often employers would expect a student doing a placement to then go back and maybe complete the final year of their studies before then being able to, say, apply to that same organisation to work with them, say, on their graduate scheme. So often they don't want people who've just finished their degree sort of coming in at that point. They want somebody who's still got a bit more of their studies to do before they're ready to sort of, apply to them.
And does age then sort of, I mean, it's a difficult thing, I guess, because we try and be in this sort of age of society where we're not meant to have discrimination. Leslie says she's in her 50s and she also has concerns about age as a in terms of getting her placements.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that sense, then, I mean, it's worth looking at sort of advertised placements, but I think the advice that we would often give to students in careers is to actually source your own. So use the networks that you have. So, if you're working, I mean, it's not so much just the people you know, it's who they know. So tapping into other people's work networks. So whether that's through your work environment, through the OU, there's obviously a massive LinkedIn alumni network that OU students can tap into as well. So we would really encourage students to source your own placements, because then you're not competing with all of the other students out there, whatever ages they happen to be. You're actually sort of targeting organisations that you want to get some experience with, and you're really then able to showcase to that employer what you can offer. Yeah. Because often for many OU students who are working and have got maybe significant amount of work experience behind them, that's a real plus to an employer. Yeah. Because they obviously know, looking at somebody's sort of CV or whatever information they're providing when they're contacting their employer, that, they've got a good understanding of the working environment. They know what's expected, and so they'll be able to sort of hit the ground running. So that's sort of really what I would say is sort of not, obviously, to look at sort of sourcing your own opportunities. And again, that's something that, sort of contacting us in careers, we can give some advice on different ways to think about who's in your network, different organisations to approach. Because I think that gives more flexibility than competing with, all of, say, a lot of younger undergraduates out there.
So I guess this is one of the things where, experience is something that is very, very valuable. And Owain, we wanted to talk about leadership. And I had this big question about, is leadership something that can be taught? So there's this whole mixture, I guess, of really sort of utilising experience and also, how we teach business and what sorts of things people can learn as well, irrespective of what age they're at any one time. So I wonder if we could just sort of briefly talk about the sort of business qualifications that students might be doing at the OU. And we wanted to have this case study because it's really, really interesting, the leadership one. But you've also been involved in the Introduction to Business, the B100 module, which students would get in their first level. And let us know again if you're a business student and if you're studying one of these modules as well. Because, you know, students can do these, you know, business management degrees with us, and then we'll sort of go through all of that process from level 1. So, Owain, tell us then broadly in terms of what you're working on, this leadership module, what's that all about, and how might that be really attractive in terms of careers? Because I can see if you've got a qualification in leadership, that may be very attractive to an employer.
Yeah, so should we start with the sort of pathway then, I suppose? So I think B100, which is the Introduction to Business and Management, is kind of fresh and different because it offers quite a kind of holistic view about what it means to work in organisations. So you learn the normal stuff like human resource management and finance and that kind of thing. But you also take a sort of more global look at global economies and ethics. And economy and the relation between economy and business, which is a brilliant foundation, because then you go on in year 2 to do a kind of more in-depth look at business functions, which is the kind of bread and butter really of being in a business school. So your operations, your finance and so on and so forth. And then after you finish that, as of October next year, you'll come to me and our team, where you'll learn about developing leadership if you follow the leadership and management pathway. And I've now completely lost the thread of what you asked me initially, but was it around tell me
about why leadership is such a good thing, and
yes,
whether or not it can be taught, because I think this is a very interesting question here, because you clearly think it can.
Yeah, well it's one of the most common questions about leadership. So I think actually this is quite an interesting time to be talking about leadership, because we've got the general election going on at the moment, and the word leadership is popping up a lot at the moment. And I'm kind of worried that leadership is getting a bad name at the moment, because it's being talked of in very sort of exclusive terms. This whole strong and stable thing tends to sort of imply, you know, just kind of leave me alone and let me get on with it. You know, leadership is for very senior, powerful people, and let everybody else forget about it. No, that's the kind of view of leadership that started with Plato in ancient Greece. It's a very kind of elitist view of leadership, where it's something that the kind of ordinary people better sort of stay out of. So, to answer your question simply, I think that this whole notion of you're born a leader or you're not is incredibly unhelpful. Unhelpful in a couple of ways. Number one, it implies that there's some kind of natural selection at work, and I think we can kind of safely dispense with that kind of thing. It's very unhelpful. And secondly, it positions leadership in the body of a single leader. So leadership becomes synonymous with I am the leader, leave me alone, let me get on with it. And then you look into things like personalities, things you're born with, like height. You know, we can already see how that's really problematic, right? Because when people describe an archetypal sort of ideal leader, they end up describing very male, masculine traits, you know, decisiveness, strength, height. You know, these are really unhelpful ways of talking about leadership. And actually they normalise a whole series of practices that are really unhelpful for employees, unhelpful for organisations, and for society in general. I think we need to reframe and rediscuss how we talk about leadership. So in terms of this course, we take a very developmental approach. So by development, it's very different in a sense to education. So it's not just about learning facts, dates, and knowledge. Really, it's about interacting between the concepts you're learning, different approaches to leadership, and your environment. So it could be your working environment if you're in work, if you're in a voluntary organisation, or it could just be sort of cultural stuff. So stuff you're noticing in the media, in the business pages of newspapers, or in the political world is fine too.
Because you ask some big questions, you know, about how come certain people end up in these positions of power? You know, who has... there are massive things that are underlying this. And so, you know, you can sort of see, I guess, how those thought processes and those skills will be so useful, as well as the content and the way that you're structuring some of this in terms of, you know, having a lot of employability skills that would be very suitable, irrespective of whether you wanted to go in leadership and management or just business more generally.
Well, I think the big mistake is to think of leadership as being the same as being a chief exec or at executive level, and that's just not true. So leadership for me is more about how you build direction and energy together in a team of people. That's not a sort of warm and fuzzy thing. It can be quite sort of hard. It can involve, well, we can talk about communication later, but it can involve very hard conversations. But lots of these practices and skills, actually, you know, once you sit down and analyse your own thinking, your own identity in some senses, and your own ways of relating to people and speaking, actually, you know, pretty much anyone can develop this stuff. It might not be very comfortable. In fact, it shouldn't be comfortable. Leadership should be quite uncomfortable. But all these kind of skills about how to step up into leadership as a practice between people, I think is really crucial for organisations and your employability, basically.
I mean, from a brownie leader to a world leader, you know, there are so many ways in which you can see that people could take some of these and make sense of some of those skills that they were developing.
Yes.
OK, so let's look then at some of the sort of more general things that one might do then with a business management degree. Because Marie, you're again specialising in the business area. And we've asked students about roles and things that they'd be interested in doing in future, and also attributes. It seems to me that there's quite a lot of focus here, especially in business, about the attributes that would be useful for employers to have from a business perspective. Do you think that's more pronounced in this sector?
I think it's pretty much common across all sectors. It's sort of part of what employers are looking for. They want somebody who has the skills, the competencies to do the role that they're recruiting them for, but equally who's going to be a good fit for their business. So sometimes the attributes, etc., if somebody's sort of, you know, got a positive attitude to work, is resilient, can manage themselves well, you know, all of these sort of areas. So it's a mix of sort of skills and attributes. Those are all sort of a combination of things that employers will be looking for.
But whereas before, when we were looking at degrees in sports and fitness, it was a lot more about the experience and things. Here, there are various different things going on. And we asked people at home, which, when considering graduate recruits, what's the most important factor for employees? Shall we see what they said?
Yeah.
OK, so the results are in, and 63% of you said attitudes and aptitudes were the most important, with a spread across the rest for the university they attended, degree results, relevant work experience. Marie, what do you make of that?
Well, that's very interesting because students are spot on, because those statistics actually came from a report that the CBI did with Pearson, looking at education and skills nationally across the UK. That was particularly the sort of the information that was gathered regarding the graduate sector. And actually, students correctly sort of said there that, you know, attitudes and attributes were the key factor that employers were looking for. Actually, second factor was relevant work experience. Nice. So the university that a student attended and the class of degree were further down the list. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's a real positive, because if many OU students have work experience behind them, then that whole sort of attitude to work, understanding of a workplace, what's required, you know, they're going to be sort of in many ways at an advantage to students who have a lot less work experience and coming into the job market sort of straight from university.
And is that something that OU students might have a lead in? Because a lot of them have often been in or had some work experience, those who are mature students who may be doing this for a second career.
Yeah. So I definitely think that's a positive. But the key thing is as well, from our perspective, from feedback that we get from employers and from, you know, sort of interaction we have with students, is that sometimes students can downplay that experience and not appreciate the skills and what they've gained through what they're doing. So that's a big part of sort of our role, really, to help students, you know, actually articulate all the great things that they have done, the experience they've gained, in a way that it's relevant to the employer and the organisation that they're applying to. Because I think that particularly comes into play if somebody is changing sectors. So it's often easy to think, well, I've worked in this sector, this isn't now the sector, if they're, say, moving into business, this isn't now the business sector, so surely, you know, that's not so relevant, the employer won't be interested in that. But there are an awful lot of transferable aspects that you know, a student can demonstrate to an employer to show that effectively they do have all the skills that they're looking for. So that's something that, you know, we would work really, you know, keenly with students on, to try and help them appreciate that.
Owain.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So it's this old thing, isn't it, where it's the old sort of archetypal bloke will look at a job description in a newspaper and say, brilliant, I can do 70% of that. And then, you know, a kind of more modest woman will look at the job ad and go, oh crikey, I can't do 30% of that. You know, that's a different mindset. So I think what we're going to try to do in B208 is get students to reflect a lot about how the practices they're learning are actually key employability practices. And so at the moment, the plan is that the final assignment will actually be some kind of covering letter, where they'll have a chance to bring out a lot of these skills and practices they've developed, and to try to push them out of that kind of quite unhelpful modesty, really.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So we've seen from some of the other talks about skills being embedded in the curriculum design. So through assessment, through activities, and of course, you know, through the sort of extracurricular options with the career service that students can get if they want to enhance those even further. But these skills seem to be so important in terms of developing them. What are some of the skills that one might generate from doing business? In particular, I guess we've got a lot of level 1 students here. So for those students, what are some of the things that they may already have generated and that they can look to get more of in the future?
Yeah, so I think at the OU we do the kind of bread and butter business function. So, you know, if you come to us and you study with us, we'll do HR, we'll do finance, we'll do marketing, we'll do strategy. But also, I think you'll come out of the OU a more rounded person inside organisations. So you'll come out quite savvy about the ethical issues that businesses deal with. You'll come out understanding the role of the organisation you might work in a global economy, because, you know, gosh, everything is global at the moment, Brexit or not. Let's not talk about that, eh? No. And you know, hopefully you'll come out as a more rounded leadership practitioner as well. You know, we use the word critical thinking sometimes. So critical thinking isn't just about criticising stuff. It's about questioning yourself, actually, and also the things you're seeing in relation to concepts and the world around you. So I think we produce a much more rounded student. And I think that's something that employers, and actually if you want to run your own business at the end of this, you know, gosh, why not? Or your own voluntary organisation. I think these are really key aspects for you going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that a lot of people are interested in the entrepreneur route as well, which again is another key sort of pathway that students would look for. Are there any skills, Marie, that employers are least happy with, or things that students may need to sort of really focus on, like right now? You know, things change over time and things become of increasing importance. What's happening right now?
Yeah, and I think one thing that sort of is constantly something that's raised by employers, and really business students shouldn't have any issues with this, is many employers look for business acumen, commercial awareness, and that really should be bread and butter for business students. But I think one of the key things is it's not an area that you can, you know, before you're going for an interview with an organisation or whatever, or putting in applications, that you can start doing last minute, you know, sort of research to try and get up to speed on that. I think the key thing is it's very much an area where students need to be continually sort of following organisations or following sectors or areas that they have a genuine interest in, and sort of what's going on, you know, sort of globally, nationally, regionally. Again, so if you're sort of pursuing that interest, whether that's through social media, whether through press or TV, whatever, you know, whatever means you're using on a regular basis, then when you come to face any sort of application questions or any questions as part of an interview or an assessment centre process, you're much more prepared because you've genuinely sort of followed, you know, what's going on in that sector. And, you know, that's a way of demonstrating your interest and how sort of commercially aware you are. And again, sort of any experience that students have within, you know, their existing workplace, if they're looking then to sort of change, again, of understanding what the needs are of the business that they're in and how that works and the priorities, etc. So being able to draw on those experiences too. So I think that's one of the skills that, you know, often is sort of really key and expected, and as I say, should be easier for business students. But again, it's something that you need to develop over time.
And that you can't fudge. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's take a quick trip to Sophie and HJ on Hot Desk and see what people at home have been talking about.
It's well, we're talking there's a few different themes that we're talking about. I think one of the big themes we're talking about is different work experience at the moment and how people are sort of complementing their degrees. So Leslie, who herself was saying worried about age and getting experience, is doing some volunteering at the Merseyside Mental Health Foundation, so doing things like IT, web development, marketing and fundraising. So there's lots of different skills she's gaining while doing some good as well.
She says the OU is really good to complement that because it means that she's got the time to do both, the flexibility with an OU degree and being able to do some volunteering work, which is really nice to hear. We've also had... Leslie's, yes, like you said, she's also the one who has some similar problems with her age. She's 56 and she has some concerns with her IT and computing course. And Alex, in one of the advisors, actually put a really good webinar up about age and studying. So that might be a good one to have a look at. We did also have Mark, who was the guy who was studying and with the military. He has an MVQ level 5 and he was wondering about credit transfer and whether he can get any credit for previous study. So I have just popped the link in there to the recognition of prior learning team. So if you do have any questions, they're probably the people that you need to speak to.
I think what we'd be interested to know from the chat is, because we've got this theme about talking about gaining extra skills and experience, if there's anything that you guys would point to in particular for business students that could be doing alongside their degree to perhaps gain more experience in these skills that may be seen as a bit weaker in industry.
Lovely. Apologies, Leslie. Leslie's a he, not a she. Sorry. Text has its limitations at times, though it may be fun. Any feedback then in terms of things that are happening at home?
Well, I think I would definitely say that volunteering is an excellent way of developing skills because, again, often voluntary organisations are very happy to have somebody coming in who's got some experience, understanding of whether it's marketing or sort of HR, maybe be involved in recruitment of volunteers and training, those sort of areas. So, you know, any sort of anything like that students can get, because I think as well it's often very flexible. You know, the organisations will offer sort of whatever hours, will work with whatever hours a student can sort of fit in. So we definitely sort of encourage students to sort of pursue that, you know, either looking at the national website, doit.org, where they can then search for vacancies in their local area, or going along to the local volunteer bureau to get a sense of what's available, you know, again, sort of locally. So definitely, you know, something that will help with enhancing skills and experience, and also trying out new things, because I think it's quite interesting if somebody, say, is changing career or and hasn't worked previously in the business sector, then a chance to maybe try out some of the skills they're learning in marketing in an actual, you know, working environment. So will help, in a sense, see whether that's something they really want to pursue.
And a lot of companies would be very grateful, like you say, if you make your own, you know, areas, you use your initiative, you go and say, I could do X, Y and Z because this is a local thing, let me come in and give you a hand. A lot of employees would really welcome that support. Owain, what's your advice?
Yeah, I was actually going to do a shameless plug for a free voluntary sector leadership course that you can find on Open Learn Works. Actually, there are two of them, an introduction and a collaborative one. And actually, that's quite a good nibble at leadership, and it assumes that you're going to be in some kind of volunteering capacity. So it gives you a chance to volunteer and learn about some leadership stuff for free, essentially. You can find that on Open Learn Works. I would say there's a note of caution here in the sense that I'm kind of a critic of unpaid internships, but I mean, if you're doing it out of free choice because you're enrolled in the OU, it's a fantastic way, of course, to practice some of these things.
And see again what sort of environment may be interesting to you.
What might suit you, absolutely.
Okay. Now, the job market is changing a lot, and I wanted to sort of move the focus to talk about graduate opportunities, because we've had a question on our widgets about outside the legal sector and investment banking, which of these companies has the highest graduate salary, listing some very prestigious companies: KPMG, Unilever, Aldi and GlaxoSmithKline. Now, graduate salaries and indeed apprenticeships, I mean, the labour market is changing in terms of support that, you know, universities and the government are offering to fund things. Let's see what people at home said in terms of who they thought had the highest. So Aldi is way in the lead here with 63%, 25% GSK and 13% for KPMG. Now, I know the answer to this, Marie, and I also know that our viewers have access to the internet.
Yes, so they may have seen the vacancy online. So
Now, how much is this job and where do we all go?
yeah, well, as I said sort of in the question there, traditionally sort of the investment banking sector and most of the legal employers tend to offer the highest salaries. But if you're looking at sort of outside of those two areas, then Aldi in the recent High Flyers Graduate Trends Survey was the next highest paid, with a starting graduate salary of over 42,000, going up to about 70-odd thousand after 4 years. So they are, and their sort of close competitor Aldi is about not too far behind, about 37,000.
Wow.
So these are for graduate management, store management roles.
Right.
That's a sort of nationwide. And I think some of them, Aldi's, or possibly Lidl, have logistics roles as well. So they sort of take on trainees, graduate trainees in both general management and logistics. So again, if it's an area students are interested in pursuing,
Yeah.
you know, the salaries are there. But that's not typical, I would say, of you know, of all employers.
No,
So,
but it does demonstrate the point very well that it might be, I mean, I bet no one goes and says, I'm going to do a degree in business management because I want to work in Aldi. But again, it's about really thinking about whether you enjoy those skills, whether you enjoy being in a dynamic
Yeah.
team. You've got things like the logistics. I mean, there is actually a lot that one could do and a lot to generate as part of a massive company. So how would you say people might conceive some of those things then, in terms of thinking, I like these skills, or I like this area of study, or I like this company? Do students tend to sort of really focus on, I want to work for a blue chip X, Y or Z? Do they have those ideas when they come to you for advice? Or is it a little bit more broad in terms of areas that they're interested in, for instance, HR, accounting, etc.?
I think that's one of the things with studying business. Basically, you can work in any sector. So public sector, commercial sector, not-for-profits. You know, you have options across the board, really. So you're looking at HR, marketing, etc., whatever sector. And again, you've got large multinationals to sort of SMEs to startups. So again, those sort of opportunities to use your skills are totally across the board. So I think, obviously, the big graduate employers have a lot of money, big marketing budgets, do a lot of promotions. So their schemes and their opportunities are often very visible to students. So, you know, some students will sort of, you know, explore what's out there and sort of be interested in those companies simply because their opportunities are much more, you know, sort of visible to them. I think one of the challenges are that an awful lot of opportunities are within the SME sector. And that's much harder for students to get a sense of, you know, what those jobs are, what those organisations might be like, how their career might develop within those organisations. So again, I know our employer engagement team sort of link up with a lot of sort of chambers of commerce and areas like that to try and get a sense of, you know, and get opportunities which we then put onto our vacancy site from a range of employers, not just the big graduate employers, and try and get sort of in touch with a range of organisations. So again, we can sort of give information to students about sort of what's available in terms of job opportunities. So I think it's really, that's something that students, you know, we would encourage students to really think about. It's sort of, you know, part of it is the role when they're thinking about what they want to do, the skills that they enjoy using and want to use predominantly in a role, but also the type of organisation they want to work for, or whether they want to, you know, run their own business, because I think, you know, those factors are equally important. And from an employer perspective, they're looking at, is this person going to be a good fit? Are they going to stay in the organisation? Because graduate recruitment is extremely expensive. So, you know, the time and the money that goes into that, they want to get people who are going to stay with their organisation and sort of, you know, go on predominantly to leadership roles within their company.
No, absolutely. OK, I'd like to sort of end this session by talking to you a little bit both about futures. And I mean, Owain, you're working on something that will come into play next year in terms of a level 2 module that students can engage with. But just sort of broadly then, in terms of areas that people may want to go in or explore, what's your sort of advice in terms of thinking about how they could take these careers forwards in business? Anything hot that you think is something that's more of a trend? I mean, the business school have a really great LinkedIn network and alumni network, so perhaps tie in with those opportunities in there. But anything students could do right now, in both your opinions, to really sort of enhance and build things along the way?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, who knows what's going to happen in the economy in the next few years? Lots of big question marks. And, of course, the other huge thing looming, which is talked about a bit at the moment, but nowhere near enough, is automation of workplaces and what that means for future employees and for work in the future. So I think the key is to focus on the kinds of skills that will never go out of sort of fashion, or the kinds of skills that will always be needed. So communication, I know the people watching have flagged up communication and how to generate, I suppose, leadership through active conversations, interesting ways of running conversations, that kind of thing, which we'll be doing on our course is really, really vital, I think. But also sort of kind of thinking work, how to critically analyse and find good information, but make sense of it as well conceptually. These are kind of broader, more bread and butter kind of organisational business skills that I think will be kind of more enduring, really. Yeah.
But I guess business is one of those quite fast-moving sectors. I mean, you mentioned the CSV option that people could look at for volunteering.
Yeah.
And Marie, you mentioned some of the webinars, and I know that the business school do a lot of webinars, and also MOOCs, the massive open online courses, where you can upskill for things that are changing. I mean, things like supply chain management, for example, are things that you may sort of want to have a bit more specialist skill in, depending. Yeah. What would your advice be then?
Well, I think one of the key things is being flexible and adaptable.
Which
because
students can do.
Which of course they so because again we don't know what's going to happen. You can sort of you mentioned Brexit earlier. We have no idea realistically what impact that's going to have on the graduate job market. So it is being able to sort of adapt to changing working environment, and the fact that we're going to have to be working longer, and there's so many different factors coming into play. But I think one key thing that comes out is that having a higher level of skills will hopefully make you more employable. So the higher levels of skills you have, the more opportunities hopefully that will be there for you within your working life. But just the other point I would make is just that sort of need to continually upskill and train, as you mentioned about MOOCs and other ways of doing that. And I think, again, OU students are very well placed, because if they've made, they're making career changes or coming into back into study sort of a bit later in their life, they're showing that they have that willingness to learn and to upskill, which again is, a key thing that employers are looking for.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, thank you both very much for joining us today. And don't forget that you can find out more information about how to engage with the Careers Advisory Service, which is on your student homepage, the careers section, and there are a whole range of ways to get in touch with them. And I know that there are links in the chat and links on the resources page of the website if you'd like to take this opportunity to have a check-in about your career and see what you're doing. And also do check out Open Learn, because irrespective of whether or not you're studying business, there are some really key skills in there that can be very useful for a whole range of students. So let's take a quick trip to the hot desk, because our next guests are going to come in the studio very soon, and we're going to be taking a look at criminology. Sophie and HJ, how are you and how's everything going?
Very well, yes. We've been talking a lot about graduate positions and jobs and things like that. We were discussing, because you want to go into the civil service?
Yes, we were talking about the civil service fast stream and the different graduate options with different employers.
Yeah, which is quite interesting. It's quite a strict regime with those graduate programmes, and very difficult to get into. So
yes, I think one of the main things about graduate schemes, and I think one of our careers advisors pointed out, is that a lot of these schemes don't actually say what degree you need. It's more about the skills that you gain, which so same with the sports and fitness degree. Someone will be very well placed to work in somewhere like the civil service, because they know how to motivate people, work as a team, they've got the IT skills. So I think, and going off what Karen said as well about, I think Stuart said that Aldi's the place to go. That's what we've got to look for. But definitely.
Diana says she works for a company and they run quite a good graduate programme, and you rotate through departments every 2 or 3 years, which is similar to the Commonwealth Office and the government, which seems to be a running theme for quite a few of them. And she says that business seem to be making more of their graduates now more than ever, which it definitely seems the case, that there are graduate positions sort of popping up all over the place at the moment. And Dee was saying that she'd had some offers. I think it was from was it Lidl and Netto, which is amazing, well done. But she's got another 2 years left of her degree, so hopefully those 2 years will fly by and you'll be in a job really soon. So which is really nice.
And our educational advisor expert in the chat, Alex, has posted a great link for Prospects, which has loads of great job profiles and says what kind of skills and experience you can get. So there's all these fantastic links being posted. Well, if you have any questions that we missed on the last session, remember, just email us, studenthub@open.ac.uk, and also head over to the careers website after, because they do things like one-on-one consultations, and they've got lots of great advice, and they're all friendly and helpful.
We'll pop that link in the chat again, because I think it has been in there, but a little while ago, so we'll pop that back in. And obviously any questions for our next session, any criminology questions or general careers questions, do let us know.